The hay cutters started before the sun pulled itself over the bighorns. Dew clung to the grass, and the scythes sang in slow arcs, steel on stalk. Behind them, a square of upright logs, the hayfield corral, sat like a low fort in the grass sea, with waist-high firing slits and a gate chained inside. Soldiers in dusty blouses watched the tree line while civilian teamsters stacked haycocks in neat mounds that made the field look like a checkerboard. All of it lay a short ride from Fort C.F. Smith on the Bozeman Road, close enough for comfort and too far for help. On another morning it might have been only sweat and boredom. On this morning the ridge to the south darkened with riders. Shapes moved on the skyline where there should have been none. Then the sun lifted and set the buckskins and feathers on fire. Lakota and Cheyenne. Later, men would debate the numbers. The harvesters did not count. They dropped the hay forks, ran for the corral, and dragged a wounded mule through the gate by the trace chains. A sergeant slammed the crossbar down. Someone shouted the password toward the fort no one could hear. In the silence that fell inside the small square, everyone felt the same tightness. There were too few of them and just enough ammunition. The first rush broke like water on stone. Riders fanned, darted close, then wheeled out. They expected muzzle-loading volleys, smoke, a pause, because that was the rhythm they knew. But the garrison had new breech-loaders, Springfield conversions that snapped open at the wrist. The first volley spoke, and then the second came almost right behind it, and then a third, shots like hammer blows. Horses stumbled at prairie dog holes. A young Cheyenne bent low and still caught a slug, and the charge cut left. Through the slits, defenders fired steady, passing cartridges in hats. A corporal counted empties in piles of 5 until the counting lost comfort. A civilian, brown as a peeled willow, set his jaw and sighted on bright paint and beadwork. He had come west to cut hay for army mules and discovered that he now tended a different harvest. The fight lengthened. Skirmishers tried the north side where the ground fell away into brush. A knot of riders came on at the east where the sun forced a squint. Arrows rained in, clattering on logs and thudding into hay. One arrow buried itself in a soldier's sleeve and wagged with every shot. The hay cocks began to smolder where stray rounds struck flint and men beat flames with blankets. By noon, the corral was a kiln. A barrel of water for the teams became a bucket line in all but name. The wounded took turns drinking last. Warriors dismounted and crawled, using the hay mounds like islands, working from cover to cover until the spaces felt narrow enough for a sprint. They held shields and pushed them like shovels. A Lakota rose and ran the last 20 yards through a hail of shots, slammed both palms to the logs, and pulled as if wood yields to courage. It did not. He died there, one arm through a loophole. 2 men shot while a third fed cartridges. A boy with a wooden keg crawled the interior of the square and cursed anyone who wasted a round. He had never owned a watch. He learned a new measure. 12 cartridges, another 12, a dipper of water. Out on the grass, riders formed again in greater numbers and came as a broad wave with whistles and yips. They wanted to stampede the will to stand. The wall held. Shot after shot clipped momentum. Horses surged and then lost heart. A painted mare spun and bolted west. Someone inside made the sign of the cross. After the wave broke, warriors settled behind low earth and took careful shots at any head above a loophole. A teamster went down with a hole under his eye, and they dragged him back by his collar while he thrashed like a man drowning. From the fort, a puff of white smoke meant the brass had seen the trouble. Too far for cannon, too busy to spare rescue. The Hayfield party was a town by itself. Defenders settled into routine. Aim low, shoot the horse first, check the portal when the sun shifts. Holding on is repetition, while fear does push-ups in your stomach. In mid-afternoon, a small wagon rolled in from the post. Mule drovers crouched low, a flag on a stick. The wagon held ammunition. It also promised the fort had not forgotten them. A ragged cheer died quick. The mules trotted a crooked path, and then, to everyone's horror, headed the wrong way, skirting a ridge too close to waiting horsemen. A lance took the driver in the shoulder. He dropped the reins and still steered with his knees, and the wagon jolted through fire to the corral. Boxes tumbled over the logs, piles grew again. Breech blocks snapped with the calm of a kitchen latch. Outside, the attackers formed for another push. You can forgive many things until you count your last rounds. The next rush came on foot, nearer, ducking and running, and it too came apart under that new rhythm, a close crack-crack that left barely a breath. Toward evening, the slope threw long shadow. The riders tried once more, then eased back with a professional nod. They learned what the wagon box fight would echo that summer. A wall and a breech loader make a new argument. The field quieted except for the buzz of flies and the soft, embarrassing noises men make when pain catches them alone. A hawk circled. At last, teams from the fort came, an infantry file in dusty blue, a surgeon with a box, and a lieutenant who counted bodies first. The attackers slid away into evening, collecting their own dead with care. The defenders slumped where they stood or sat, stunned by the way stillness can feel heavier than sound. They tallied hurts, a pierced cheek, a grazed rib, a split thumb, 2 men who would walk with a hitch. They tallied their luck. The gate held, the square stood. The hay would still be cut tomorrow because animals do not understand history. Later, the army wrote reports that made the numbers tidy and the adjectives brave. Newspapers would bend the story to suit the month. The truth was more ordinary. A few dozen men and boys, some sober, some not, did not break. They were saved by a square of logs, by brass-bright cartridges in boxes, by habit and a desire to see sunrise. If you walk that ground now, the grass hides the geometry. The wind says nothing. From the rise, you can see the river turn and the faint line of the old road. Hold your hand at your waist, and you know the height of the loopholes. You can listen for a drum on saddle leather and hear only your breath. The men who charged thought courage could overrun timber and iron. They were not wrong in general, only at that place with those guns. And the men inside learned what every small fort learns. Holding the line is a humble, endless verb. In town, the next week, someone said the hayfield was just luck and lumber. Another man, picking splinters from his palm, said luck likes company, and that company is practice. Both were right in their way. The corral stayed, the trail stayed dangerous, and the summer wrote the same lesson again in other places. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.